do want to talk about some weighty things to do with our vision and mission here. I'll just make one comment about Brad's announcement there. Ginny and I were talking about this at home the other day, and Kingston was over, and Kingston said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to be stepping down eventually from being senior pastor." Kingston said, "That doesn't mean you got to give your keys back, does it?" And I said, "No, it doesn't. He likes access to the gym. One of the perks of being a pastor's kid or grandkid, I guess." You know, I had a wonderful conversation today for probably better part of an hour and a half, 2 hours with my good friend Jonathan McCrease in Greece. And I wanted him to find out from me before Efi what I was doing, but we got into a great conversation about leading through COVID and the challenges that he's faced in Greece with Hellenic Ministries and challenges we face here and conversations we engage in and all that kind of thing. And he made a statement today that landed with me, and I liked it. And it was this statement. He said, "We need to be talking about weightier issues. We need to be talking about weightier issues than the stuff that's going on in the world and where we fall on either side of this or that." And he said, "You know, the church isn't talking about weightier issues enough." And I thought that was so good. I wrote it down. And, you know, our conversations over the last couple of years have been distracted and not as weighty as they could be. And so I thought tonight I couldn't think of anything weightier to talk to you about than two profound questions that I found in the story of Hagar. Do you remember her? Abraham was married to Sarah, and God had made promises to them that they would have a child. But those promises hadn't been fulfilled, and they were living in the meantime and getting tired of living in the meantime. And so they took things into their own hands, and Sarah said, "Well, why don't you take Hagar and sleep with her, and you know, maybe the child that she bears could be the heir." And so he did, and sure enough, she got pregnant. And when she was pregnant and Sarah wasn't, she despised her mistress, Sarah, and Sarah and her went head to head, as you can imagine, and basically Hagar had to leave. And there were no social nets and things like that, so she's on the backside of the desert. And it says, the angel of the Lord found her there. And I love this verse because it raises two profound, weighty questions. It says, the angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. That's like trying to give an address in central Alberta. It's the farm just past the rock by the big tree on the left, you know? And the angel said to Hagar, servant of Sarah, here's the two questions. Where have you come from? And where are you going? Where have you come from? And where are you going? Those are weighty questions for us as a church. I'd just like to think about them with you for a minute. I'd like to think about where we've come from. That's absolutely crucial, that we don't forget where we've come from, that we don't forget who we are. You know, this is review, and many of you, know this better than I do, but many, many years ago, we went and we sought the Lord for a vision, a mission, a call, if you would, for the church. What would God have us do at CrossRoads Church? And after better part of a year of praying and worshiping and seeking God and talking together and studying the Bible, we came up with the first phase of that vision statement that you see on the screen and that Brad read to us tonight. And it became our call as a church. This is what God has called us to do, to reach people in central Alberta for Christ. And that went deep for us. That changed our world. It changed our church. It is the lens that we began to look at everything through, and I hope today still is. To take the eternal gospel into Red Deer in central Alberta. And, we grew. And pre-COVID, even in this place on a Sunday morning, you would have literally 200 to 300 people that didn't know Jesus sitting here. And it impacted the way we did worship and taught the Bible and all that kind of thing. And as we began to grow, it got very, very exciting. And we rallied around the vision and we united around that vision. We knew who we were and we knew what God's call on us was. And it was good times. We were excited. It energized us. And, it was like a first love. It really was. We were so passionate about seeing people come to Christ. And we prayed for them. We saw miracles. We saw answers to prayer. We saw people come to Christ. And we couldn't provide space for them. So God found this land, and all we had was enough money to buy the land. And yet within 2 years, we'd paid off the first phase of the building. And tonight we sit in a clear title building. And, God clearly went ahead of us. And I liken that. It was just like a first love. And when we began to see people that we'd prayed for come to Christ and baptize them, it was just over the top. The first Easter where we kind of took the hoops down and invited people to get baptized that didn't know Jesus. There must have been 50 to 100 of them here being baptized. And, there was a time when we went to the river to baptize people so that all of us could come and watch. And first man ever baptized in the river, to my knowledge, was Dale Gardner, who somebody had prayed for. And he used to come to Crosswalk when we had Crosswalk and sit in the balcony. He was 50, 55, but he came with the kids. And while he was there one night, he heard about Alpha, went to Alpha, came to Christ. We baptized him in the river. And his shorts were a little loose, and he came up and he mooned the whole crowd. But it was a great day in the life of CrossRoads. And, I look back at those days and I think, God doesn't change. That's our call. Churches have a call like people have call. And our call was to reach people for Christ. And the challenge when you're in my chair, Jordan's chair, the board's chair, is to stay on track. Because we can get distracted and we get pulled different directions. We do. Are you going to be John MacArthur's church? Nope. You're going to fight the government? Nope. Are you going to be Bethel North? Nope. We're CrossRoads in central Alberta, and our call is to reach people for Jesus Christ, and we will not be moved from that. And where have we come from becomes a critical question, especially at a stage we're at today, because if we lose our way, then we really lose the guidance of the Spirit of God who put us on this path in the first place. So to me, that's a very weighty question and one that we need to wrestle with all the time. The second question is, where are we going? Where are we going? Well, maybe you could turn that question over and raise the question, are we still on course? And I hope the answer is yes, because when God puts his call on a person or on a church, it's for something. It's for something. In the Bible, you have promise. We often focus on the promise, but we also have fulfillment in the Bible. And, sometimes we don't think about the fulfillment bit much. But God has made many promises to answer our prayers. And we've been praying for our lost friends and neighbors for a long time. We've been praying for this city for a long time. Been engaged in the city for a long time. Don't think that God won't honor his word when he promises to answer prayer. He will. The day will come when God will fulfill his promise. God has promised in the scripture to pour out his Spirit. He's promised to pour out his Spirit. In Joel chapter 2, God says, in the last days I'll pour out my Spirit. Now Peter comes along in Acts 2 and says, this is that, when he baptizes his first 2,000 or 3,000 people. But in Joel goes deeper than Acts. Joel says, before the great and dreadful day of the Lord, and he talks about the sun being darkened and the moon being darkened and so on, God will pour out his Spirit. And as a board and a lead team and as a church, we believe that God would pour out his Spirit on Central Alberta. And I believe with all of my heart the day will come, and I believe I'll see it this side of heaven, when God will pour out his Spirit on Central Alberta. And more people will be swept into the kingdom of God than you could ever imagine. And that's why we have to stay on course. God is up to something really, really big. And it's really, really exciting. And we need to recover our first love for the call that God gave us and for the God that gave us that call. I don't get worried about how God's reconfiguring the church. It is what it is. It's above my pay grade to figure that out. But what I do know is in clearing a number of people and freeing them to go to other churches, he's given us a lot more space. And I think we're going to need every seat for our lost friends and neighbors that we've been praying for. And I believe the day will come when you won't find an empty seat here, or it'll be hard to move in the foyer, because God will pour out his Spirit. He's not a God that speaks and promises and doesn't come through on it. So for my money, which is actually very little when you think about it, I want to be ready. I want to be ready for that day. I want to engage in weighty conversations. Tired the conversations about mandates and convoys and vaccines. It's like, whatever, whatever. The weighty conversations have to do with what God has called us to do, what he's up to in the world, and what he's still to do. And I want to be someone that rallies around that vision, that passion. And I hope you are too. So I guess what I'd like to suggest to you is, next time you're out for coffee with a friend from church, why don't you have a weighty conversation? Why don't you let the world be what it is? Why don't you talk about what God's called us to do? Let's talk about where God's taking us, because that's exciting stuff. That's life-giving. The other's death. And so I just want to share that with you tonight, because I've always been excited about our vision. I still am, and I still believe that God has so much to do. And it's easy to get disheartened in the days that we're living in. And it's easy to wonder what God's up to. But he said to Habakkuk, however you say his name, when Habakkuk didn't understand what was going on in the world around him, he said, Habakkuk, you don't get it, but I'll tell you what. The day's coming, God said, when the whole earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. And that's still God's end game. And we're somewhere in that middle. And I just want to be a part of what God's doing. I don't want to be distracted or pulled off course. And so as a church, that's why we've, as Brad said, I think it was Brad, when you Doug, but Brad said, we lose people because of the decisions we make, but we're not pulling back on our decisions. We make them because they're thought through, they're prayed through, and they have to do with God's call on us. So I submit that to you tonight for your consideration, and thanks for listening. Thanks for listening.